Hi, this is Esther Adams with Strides to Solutions, and I want to talk to you today about something that might be quietly running your life without you even realizing it. It's a rule you learned so early, so thoroughly, that it feels like truth, and it's probably causing you more pain than you know. Here's the rule: effort leads to outcome, which leads to worth. Do the work, get the result, feel good about yourself. Simple, right? Clean, linear, fair. Except it's also quietly teaching you something much darker. If the outcome doesn't happen, something must be wrong with me. And that's where shame starts creeping in. That's where helplessness begins taking root. That's where your nervous system learns to collapse when life doesn't cooperate with your plans, when things don't work out despite your best efforts, when the world refuses to play by the rules you were taught. Let me paint a picture of how this rule gets installed. Think about childhood for a moment. So much of it actually did work this way, didn't it? You tried hard in school, you got good grades, you were good, you got approval from parents and teachers, you worked extra hard, you got praise, you performed well, you belonged. The equation held up. The world felt linear, predictable, even fair. Your brain learned something powerful during those years. It learned, oh, I see, I have control here. I put in effort, I get results. Your worth seemed to go up when you succeeded, and presumably down when you didn't. It was a brilliant adaptation for navigating childhood systems that were, let's be honest, designed to be fairly predictable. School has clear rules, family systems have patterns, sports have measurable wins and losses, but then you grow up. And adulthood? Adulthood doesn't run on that childhood rule. The world gets exponentially more complex. Outcomes depend on so many variables now: timing that you can't control, opportunities that depend on who you know or where you are, luck, pure and simple, systems that are broken or biased, other people's choices and moods and agendas, market forces, economic conditions, a global pandemic, for crying out loud. Suddenly you're operating in an environment where your effort, no matter how genuine, how consistent, how excellent, cannot guarantee the outcome you want. And when that old childhood rule meets this unpredictable adult world, something painful happens. You start blaming yourself for things no one could possibly control. You didn't get the promotion even though you worked harder than anyone else. What's wrong with me? The relationship ended even though you tried everything. I must be fundamentally broken. The business didn't take off even though you gave it everything you had. I'm a failure. Do you hear what's happening? You're applying a childhood framework to adult complexity, and you're suffering for it. The equation that worked perfectly in a simpler system is now causing you to internalize failures that aren't even really failures, just outcomes influenced by variables you couldn't control. And I need to pause here and acknowledge something really important, because if you're listening to this and feeling frustrated, that frustration is valid. What you're experiencing is the most painful psychological contradiction adults face. It's this: I'm doing everything right, the hard work, the responsibility, the drive, the character, and nothing is moving. Can you feel that? That specific kind of agony, that bewilderment mixed with exhaustion, mixed with growing desperation? This frustration isn't immaturity. It isn't entitlement. It isn't you not trying hard enough. Let me be absolutely clear about that, because I know that's what you tell yourself. I know you lie awake at 3 a.m., wondering if you're just not working hard enough, if there's something fundamentally defective about your effort. I know you've been told, explicitly or implicitly, to just try harder, work smarter, be more strategic, as if the problem is simply that you haven't found the right combination yet. No. What you're experiencing is the collision of two truths that are both real, both valid, and brutally incompatible. First truth: you're operating with high integrity and high effort. You're doing the work, you're showing up, you're being excellent, you're holding yourself to high standards and meeting them. Second truth: you're living in a world where effort does not guarantee outcome, where doing everything right doesn't promise results, where excellence doesn't ensure recognition or reward or movement forward. that gap between those two truths, it's brutal, and it feels unfair because it is unfair. There's no getting around that reality. The world isn't structured to reward virtue and effort alone as much as we wish it were. Let me break down exactly why this frustration hits so hard and why it doesn't mean something is wrong with you. First, you're carrying an identity built on effort leading to outcome. High effort people like you who are listening to this, you build your whole sense of self around showing up, doing the work, pushing through, being dependable, being excellent. That's not a character flaw. That's actually beautiful. Those are virtues that matter, that have value, that make you someone others can count on. But here's what happens when you've structured your identity this way. When the effort doesn't pay off, the identity takes the hit. It feels like if I'm doing everything right and nothing is working, then maybe I'm the problem. That is the pain beneath the frustration, not I'm annoyed this isn't working. It's my entire sense of who I am is being called into question. It's existential, not just situational. Second, and this is crucial, your nervous system learned that effort equals safety. In childhood, effort protected you in very real ways. Effort got you approval, which meant you were less likely to be criticized or rejected. Effort reduced conflict because when you were working hard and being good, adults around you were calmer, more stable. Effort lowered shame because you had evidence you were trying, you were doing your part. Effort kept adults stable around you, which in a child's world is essential for survival. Effort earned love or belonging, or at least reduced the chances of rejection or punishment. So now, as an adult, when effort isn't producing results, your nervous system doesn't just feel disappointed or annoyed, it feels unsafe. Not disappointed, not irritated, unsafe, like the protection you always relied on has been stripped away. That's why the frustration feels like panic, not just irritation. Your nervous system is sending alarm signals. The thing that always kept us safe isn't working anymore. We are in danger. It's a threat response, not a tantrum. It's your body trying to tell you that something fundamental has shifted in a way that feels destabilizing. Third, you're not just losing outcomes, you're losing predictability. High effort people depend on order, on cause and effect, on a world that responds in recognizable ways. When you work hard, you expect some kind of response from the world, not necessarily success every time, but some kind of movement, some acknowledgement that your effort registered, that it mattered, that it created some ripple in reality. But when the world goes quiet, when there's no progress, no shift, no movement, the psyche feels unheld, unsupported, abandoned by the system. The frustration isn't just, why isn't this working? It's, why is nothing responding to me? Why am I invisible? Why doesn't my effort even register? It's like screaming into a void and hearing nothing back. That is a deeper wound than simple disappointment. It touches something primal about mattering, about existing in a world that acknowledges your presence and your contributions. Fourth, and this is the hardest truth, you're still playing by rules life no longer uses. The adult world does not reward effort alone. I wish it did. It would be so much fairer if it did, but it doesn't, and pretending otherwise just sets you up for more suffering. The adult world rewards timing. It rewards networks and who you know, which feels grossly unfair but is nonetheless true. It rewards opportunity and being in the right place at the right moment, which has very little to do with how hard you've worked to get there. It rewards visibility, being seen by the people who matter, which often depends on factors outside your control. It rewards strategy, not just hard work, knowing how to work and not just how to work hard. It rewards luck, and yes, I know that's infuriating to hear, but denying the role of luck doesn't make it go away. It rewards leverage, being able to amplify your effort through systems or resources or other people, which requires access you may not have. It rewards emotional resilience, the capacity to keep going when things aren't working, which is easier when you haven't already been depleted by years of unrewarded effort. It rewards support systems, having people who can help you, which not everyone has equally. It rewards privilege and proximity to power and momentum and resource access and psychological endurance. Effort is only one ingredient and not always the deciding one. That doesn't mean effort is pointless. Please hear me on this. It means the world is no longer linear, no longer simple, no longer operating on the cause and effect logic that governed your childhood experience. You're living with a childhood rule inside an adult ecosystem. The frustration you're feeling is the shock of that mismatch. It's your psyche trying to make sense of why the formula that always worked has stopped working, why the map you were given doesn't match the territory you're navigating. Fifth, your frustration is not immaturity, it's grief. It's grief that effort doesn't buy predictability, that you can do everything right and still not get what you worked for. It's grief that goodness doesn't guarantee reward, that being a decent person doesn't protect you from disappointment and loss. It's grief that responsibility doesn't secure stability, that showing up and doing your part doesn't ensure safety or success. It's grief that hard work doesn't always change outcomes, that sometimes the variables are just bigger than you and your effort combined. You're not angry because you're unreasonable or entitled or immature. You're angry because you're grieving a system you were trained to trust, a system that told you, do this and you'll be okay, work hard and you'll be rewarded, be good and good things will happen. That system lied to you, not intentionally maybe, but it oversimplified reality in ways that set you up for this painful collision with adult complexity. This grief is invisible. Nobody talks about it. Nobody validates it. We're supposed to just accept that life is unfair and move on without acknowledging the loss of the worldview we built our lives around. But it is real, and it is legitimate, and it deserves to be recognized. Sixth, and I need you to really hear this, you're not wrong. Your method is not wrong. Your traits, those qualities of diligence and persistence and responsibility, those are not wrong. You're operating with outdated equations, formulas that worked in one context but don't translate to the more complex reality you're in now. Success in adulthood requires strategy layered on top of effort. It requires self worth that doesn't collapse when results stall, an identity that can remain stable even when outcomes are uncertain. It requires capacity to tolerate uncertainty and ambiguity, to keep moving forward even when you can't see the path clearly. It requires pivoting instead of just pushing harder when something isn't working, recognizing when more effort isn't the answer. It requires knowing when effort is no longer the bottleneck, when the problem isn't that you're not trying hard enough, but that you're trying hard at the wrong thing, or in the wrong way, or at the wrong time. Effort matters. It absolutely matters. It just isn't the only variable anymore, and treating it like it is will break you. And seventh, your frustration is a sign of misalignment, not inadequacy. It doesn't mean you're failing. It doesn't mean you're cursed or incompetent or blocked or unworthy. It means you are overusing effort in a place that requires a different skill or different timing, like trying to unlock a door with the wrong key, no matter how perfectly that key worked on previous doors. You don't need more effort. You probably need a new equation, new strategies that account for the variables effort alone can't address. You need new interpretations of what's happening, ways of understanding your situation that don't default to self blame. You need new supports, people and systems and resources that can supplement your individual effort. You need new variables in your approach, factors beyond just working harder. Not more exhaustion, not more self blame, not more punishing yourself for not being enough. Now, here's why understanding all of this matters so much. There's this fear that goes, if my worth isn't tied to outcomes, I won't succeed. I'll become lazy. I won't get promoted. I won't make money. I'll stop trying. This fear is incredibly common among high achievers, among people who've built their lives around effort and excellence. It feels like loosening your grip on this equation means losing your edge, your drive, your competitive advantage. But that fear is based on a fundamental confusion. It's mixing up two completely different types of worth, and understanding this distinction might be one of the most important things you ever learn. Once you see this difference clearly, So much of the suffering becomes unnecessary. There's intrinsic worth. That's your value as a human being. It's stable, it's unconditional, it's not tied to your performance or your productivity or your achievements. You had this worth the day you were born, before you ever achieved a single thing, before you could even speak or walk or contribute anything. You'll have it on your worst day, your laziest day, your most spectacular failure of a day. This worth doesn't fluctuate based on what you do or don't accomplish. It just is, like your existence itself. And then there's what I'd call market worth or skill worth. That's the value you bring to a role or opportunity in a specific context. It's based on your skills, your consistency, your experience, your timing, and market demand. This absolutely matters for getting hired, getting promoted, making money, advancing in your career. This is what employers and clients and opportunities respond to. Here's the key insight that changes everything. Promotions respond to competence and contribution, not to whether you feel worthy enough as a person deep down inside. Your identity does not earn money. Your skills and behaviors do. Your resume gets you the interview, not your existential self concept. The company that hires you doesn't care about your intrinsic self worth. They don't need you to feel fundamentally valuable as a human being. They care about whether you can do the job, whether you're reliable, whether you bring value to their organization, whether you can solve the problems they need solved. Those are behavioral skill based things, not identity based things. They're about what you can do, not about who you are at your core. But here's what healthy intrinsic self worth actually does for you in practical terms. It helps you show up fully in interviews and negotiations and challenging projects. It helps you take risks without being paralyzed by fear of failure, because failure doesn't threaten your fundamental sense of okayness. It helps you negotiate for yourself, advocate for what you need and deserve without the underlying terror that asking might reveal your unworthiness. It helps you grow and learn from mistakes instead of collapsing into shame when you get critical feedback. It helps you not fall apart during setbacks, which means you can keep going, keep adapting, keep trying new approaches instead of spiraling into despair or giving up. Low self worth, on the other hand, sabotages you in ways that have nothing to do with your actual competence. It makes you anxious, constantly second guessing yourself, and looking for evidence that you're about to be exposed as a fraud. It makes you rigid, unable to adapt when strategies aren't working because you're so invested in proving the strategy wasn't the problem, you were. It makes you underconfident, turning down opportunities you're qualified for because you don't believe you deserve them. It makes you afraid to try new things because every attempt feels like a referendum on your fundamental okayness as a human being, every failure confirmation of what you secretly fear about yourself. It makes you defensive instead of curious when you receive feedback, because you hear criticism of your work as criticism of your worth. It makes you quit when things get hard because if the outcome isn't guaranteed, why risk confirming what you secretly fear about yourself? So the issue isn't dropping your work ethic. It's not about becoming lazy or giving up on excellence or settling for mediocrity. It's about dropping the shame based meaning you've attached to outcomes that are partly or fully outside your control. It's about separating your competence from your worth, your results from your value, your circumstances from your identity. Let me give you a healthier, more accurate equation for adult life. Here it is. Effort increases probability, but does not guarantee outcome. Read that again. Effort increases probability, but does not guarantee outcome. This is not giving up. This is growing up. This is understanding how reality actually works, not how you were taught it should work when you were 7 years old and the world was simpler and more controllable. What does this mean practically? It means you keep your work ethic, all of it. You keep your sense of responsibility, your commitment to showing up and doing what you said you'd do. You keep your drive, that internal motivation to pursue goals and create and achieve. You keep your commitment to excellence, to doing things well rather than just getting by. All of that stays. Those are valuable qualities that will serve you throughout your life. But you stop tying your identity, your fundamental sense of self, to outcomes you cannot fully control. You stop making every result or lack of result mean something about who you are as a person. You stop treating setbacks as evidence of your inadequacy rather than as information about what needs to be adjusted. Instead of no result means I'm failing as a person, you shift to no result means the variables are bigger than me and I need to adapt my strategy. Can you feel the difference in those two statements? One is a condemnation of your being, the other is an observation about reality and an invitation to problem solve. Instead of, I didn't make it happen, therefore I'm defective, you shift to, I influenced what I could influence, and some factors were outside my control. What can I learn about which variables matter most in this situation? Again, one is identity destruction, the other is strategic thinking. Instead of collapsing into helplessness and self blame, you adapt. You learn from what happened, you pivot to a different approach or a different goal. You try something new, bring in different resources, adjust your strategy based on what the situation is actually demanding rather than just what you're good at providing. And that adaptability, that resilience, that flexibility, that's exactly how adults create long term success, not through rigidly believing they should be able to control everything through sheer force of effort, but through understanding what they can and cannot control and adjusting accordingly, through staying curious instead of defensive, through treating outcomes as feedback rather than verdicts. This shift changes everything. Let me tell you what it actually feels like when you start living this way, because it's not theoretical. It changes your daily experience of being alive. Shame transforms into clarity. When something doesn't work out, instead of spiraling into, what's wrong with me? Why can't I ever get this right? What's fundamentally broken about me? You can ask, what factors were at play here? What was in my control? What wasn't? What can I learn from this? What should I do differently next time? What other variables need to be addressed? You become a scientist studying your life rather than a defendant on trial for your worth. Helplessness transforms into flexibility. Instead of feeling stuck and paralyzed because you tried and it didn't work, and you don't know what else to do, and clearly you're just not capable, you can see that there are multiple pathways, multiple approaches, multiple ways to move forward. You can brainstorm alternatives without each one feeling like your last chance. You can experiment without everything riding on each experiment succeeding. Self blame transforms into strategy. Instead of beating yourself up for not being enough, not trying hard enough, not being smart enough or capable enough or worthy enough, you can analyze the situation objectively. You can look at what worked, what didn't, what might need to change. You can make better decisions going forward based on information rather than shame. Fear transforms into resilience. When you're not terrified that every failure proves something terrible about who you are, you can take bigger risks, try harder things, put yourself out there more fully. You can handle rejection without it destroying you. You can face uncertainty without it paralyzing you. You can learn and grow and stretch because the stakes of any individual outcome aren't so catastrophically high. This shift frees you from the exhausting belief that every result or lack of result is a verdict on who you are as a person. It lets you separate what happened from what it means about you. It lets you care deeply about outcomes without your worth being determined by them. And here's what's so beautiful about this: you don't need to abandon effort. You don't need to stop caring about excellence or achievement or making a difference. You don't need to give up on your goals or your dreams or your ambitions or your desire to create and contribute. You only need to update the meaning you attach to what effort can and cannot do. You need to understand that effort is powerful and valuable and necessary, and also not sufficient to guarantee outcomes in a complex world. You need to get realistic about the variables that matter beyond effort alone. You need to understand that you are not God. You're a human being operating in a complex, interconnected system with many variables, many of which you don't control and never will. You have influence, real influence that matters. You have agency, the capacity to make choices that shape your life. You have power, the ability to change things within your sphere of control. But you don't have total control, and you were never supposed to have total control. And the fact that you don't isn't evidence of your inadequacy. Your childhood needed you to believe in that simple equation because children need to feel like they have some control in a world where they're actually quite powerless. It served you then, genuinely served you. It helped you develop a work ethic, a sense of responsibility, a drive to do your best, skills and qualities that are genuinely valuable. But you're not a child anymore, and what served you in childhood can become a prison in adulthood if you don't update it. You're operating in adult complexity now. And adult complexity requires adult thinking, more nuanced and sophisticated than the black and white logic of childhood. It requires understanding probability rather than certainty, understanding that you can increase the likelihood of positive outcomes without being able to guarantee them. It requires holding paradoxes. I can do my absolute best, and the outcome might not work out. And both of those things can be true simultaneously without either one canceling out the other. I can be excellent and not get rewarded. I can do everything right and still face disappointment. Those aren't contradictions, they're just reality. It requires radical responsibility for your effort, your choices, your behavior, your skills, your growth, everything within your actual control. And it requires radical acceptance of the limits of your control over outcomes, over timing, over other people's choices, over market conditions, over all the variables that exist outside your sphere of influence. Both are necessary, both are adult. Neither cancels out the other. This is the shift that lets you breathe again. This is the shift that lets you try again after failure without it destroying you, without each setback feeling like confirmation of your worst fears about yourself. This is the shift that makes adulthood feel survivable and maybe, just maybe, even hopeful instead of terrifying. Because when you're not constantly terrified that any setback means you're fundamentally defective, you can actually engage with life more fully. You can take risks without being paralyzed by the fear of what failure would mean. You can be creative, trying things that might not work rather than only doing what's guaranteed to succeed. You can be vulnerable, letting people see you struggle and fail instead of maintaining a perfect facade. You can ask for help without feeling like needing help proves you're inadequate. You can pivot when something's not working instead of just trying harder at the same failing strategy because you're convinced that if you were just good enough, talented enough, worthy enough, you could make it work through sheer force of will. You can actually live, really live, instead of just trying to survive each day while carrying the weight of believing your worth is constantly on trial. And here's something else that happens when you make this shift. You actually become more successful, not less, because you're not wasting enormous amounts of energy on shame and self blame, energy that could be going toward actually solving problems and pursuing opportunities. You're not frozen by fear of failure, which means you attempt more and therefore succeed more often simply through greater volume in learning. You're not avoiding opportunities because they feel too risky or because you don't feel worthy enough to pursue them. You're not so rigid in your approach that you miss better paths forward because you're too invested in proving that your original approach was right and you're not the problem. You become someone who can learn from feedback without being destroyed by it, which means you improve faster and more consistently. Someone who can fail without falling apart, which means you're willing to try difficult things with uncertain outcomes. Someone who can keep going when things get hard, because the hard thing isn't also confirming your deepest fears about yourself, so you have more reserves to draw on. Someone who can adapt and pivot and adjust because you're not so attached to being right that you can't be flexible. So if you've been carrying this weight, if you've been doing everything right and nothing is moving, and you've been telling yourself that means something is wrong with you, I want you to know something clearly. Nothing is wrong with you. Nothing fundamental is broken or defective about you as a person. You're carrying an outdated equation trying to navigate adult reality with childhood logic. You're grieving a system that promised you fairness and predictability and control and didn't deliver on those promises. That grief is real and it's valid and it deserves to be acknowledged. And you can put it down. You can update your operating system, rewrite the code you're running on. You can grow into a more accurate, more compassionate, more sustainable way of relating to your efforts and your outcomes, to yourself and the world you're navigating. Your worth is not on trial every time you try something. Your worth is not determined by whether things work out the way you hoped. Your worth was established before you ever achieved anything, before you could even walk or talk, and it remains regardless of what you achieve or don't achieve going forward. It's not something you earn, it's not something you can lose, it's not conditional on your performance or your outcomes or your productivity. What is on trial when you pursue goals is your strategy, whether your approach is well matched to the situation, your timing, whether now is the right moment for this particular pursuit, your skills in this particular area, whether you have the capabilities this situation requires, your understanding of the system you're operating in, whether you've accurately assessed what variables matter most. Those things are all learnable, adjustable, improvable, changeable. Those things are appropriate subjects for evaluation and feedback and growth and strategic thinking, but you, the essential you, the human being worthy of love and belonging and compassion and dignity, that's not up for debate. That's not conditional on outcomes or performance or achievement. That never was, even though you learned otherwise through the implicit messages of childhood and a culture that conflates worth with productivity. This is the work. This is the shift that changes everything. This is what lets you stop white knuckling your way through life, terrified of what any failure might mean about you, exhausted from carrying the weight of believing you should be able to control outcomes through sheer force of effort and virtue. And when you make this shift, when you really integrate it at a level deeper than intellectual understanding, everything changes. Not because you stop trying or stop caring or lower your standards or settle for less, but because you stop suffering unnecessarily, stop making yourself wrong for things you couldn't control. Not because you stop caring about outcomes, but because you stop making those outcomes mean something about your fundamental worth as a human being. Not because the world suddenly becomes fair, but because you stop blaming yourself for the world's unfairness. This is the shift that leads to sustainable success rather than burnout, to genuine confidence rather than performance based pseudo confidence that collapses when things don't go well, to resilience that lasts through multiple setbacks instead of brittle perfectionism that shatters at the first failure. This is the shift that lets you build a life that feels good from the inside, not just impressive from the outside, that nourishes you instead of depleting you. You deserve that. You deserve to live without that constant grinding anxiety that you're one failure away from being exposed as fundamentally unworthy. You deserve to try things without your entire sense of self hanging in the balance, without every attempt feeling like a referendum on your right to exist as you are. You deserve to grieve the unfairness of adult reality without also blaming yourself for it, without taking on responsibility for variables you never controlled. So please consider updating that childhood rule that's running your life. It served you once, genuinely helped you survive and succeed in the simpler systems of childhood, but it doesn't serve you anymore, not in the complexity you're navigating now. You're ready for something better, something truer, something that actually matches the reality of the adult world instead of the simplified version you were taught. You're ready to separate effort from guaranteed outcome, recognizing that one increases the probability of the other without ensuring it, and to separate outcome from worth, understanding that what happens doesn't determine what you are. You're ready to grieve the loss of predictability and control without making that loss mean something is wrong with you. And when you do, you'll find something incredible: freedom. Freedom to try without terror of what failure would mean. Freedom to fail without it destroying your sense of self. Freedom to learn from mistakes without shame. Freedom to adapt when strategies aren't working. Freedom to ask for help without feeling like needing help proves your inadequacy. Freedom to be fully, imperfectly, courageously human in all your complexity and limitation and beauty. That's what I'm hoping for you. That's the shift that changes everything, that opens up possibilities you couldn't access while you were trapped in that old equation. That's the life that becomes available when you stop trying to be perfect and start being real. When you stop trying to control everything and start responding wisely to what actually is. This is Esther Adams with Strides to Solutions. Thank you for listening.